Some houses do not just stand quietly against time, they breathe with it. They pulse with the weight of every secret that was never meant to be told. Blackwood Lane held one of those houses, and the townspeople whispered its name like a curse. The house on Blackwood Lane, a place where silence was never empty, but thick and pressing. And the Colemans made the mistake of thinking silence meant safety. Imagine you are there, standing on the overgrown path that leads to the front door. Weeds curling around your ankles like the house itself is trying to keep you out. The air is heavier than it should be. You breathe, but each breath tastes old, stale, like it has been trapped inside the house for decades, waiting for someone foolish enough to inhale it again. The shutters hang crooked. The paint has long since peeled away. Yet somehow the house does not feel dead. It feels aware, as if it knows you are watching it, as if it is holding its breath and waiting for you to take the first step. The Colemans ignored the warnings. They said ghosts were fairy tales. They said houses could not be evil. But on that first night, when the town went dark and the street outside fell quiet, when the clock ticked over to 1 a.m., something inside the walls stirred, and it never stopped. The first signs were small: a draft that seemed too cold for spring, a door that creaked open even after being latched, the family dog whining at the staircase but never climbing it, little things that could be explained away until the sounds began. At 2 a.m., Mr. Coleman swore he heard footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway, but when he checked every room, they were empty. At 3:14 a.m., Mrs. Coleman felt her blanket tugged down from the bed, as if invisible fingers had pinched the fabric and dragged it slowly. And yet when she gasped and turned, no one was there. At 12:45 a.m., the children heard knocking from inside their closet. Deliberate, slow, knock, knock, knock. And when the father opened the door to prove there was nothing there, he found only toys, but each toy was turned to face the wall. The neighbors said they had warned them, that the house remembers, that it does not welcome strangers, but the Colemans did not listen. By the end of that first week, sleep had left the home entirely, and the whispers had begun. Not faint, not distant, but close enough that the children swore someone was leaning into their ears, whispering their names in the dark, over and over, until they stopped answering when called by their parents, because they could not tell who was speaking anymore. By the second week, the house was no longer pretending. Lights flickered even with new bulbs. Shadows swayed against the walls, though no one moved. And the air grew colder every night until their breaths hung like smoke in the living room. The Colemans tried to be logical. They prayed, they burned sage, they nailed crosses to the walls. But the house did not care. It was not a thing to be banished. It was alive, and alive things resist being forced out. On the final night, the neighbors saw every window glow with light, every curtain drawn tight as if to hide what was inside. At 11:07 p.m., a scream rang down Blackwood Lane, high, sharp, and then cut off as if swallowed. When the police entered the house hours later, they found the front door still locked from the inside, the furniture overturned, the walls wet with condensation, though no pipes had burst. But the Colemans were gone. Not a trace of them remained. Just silence, thick and pressing, the kind of silence that makes your bones ache. And if you walk past Blackwood Lane today, you will see the house still standing, patient, waiting, the door swollen shut, the windows clouded with dust. But if you stop, just for a moment, you might hear it. Faint but certain, a knock, 3 times, steady, from the inside, waiting for someone new to answer. Screams of the Mind is not just a collection of horror, it is a doorway, a place where the voices of shadows are given form, a place for the restless, the haunted, the curious, and the broken. Every single day, I bring you bone-chilling tales, psychological terrors, creeping truths that claw their way out of silence, disturbing memories that were never meant to be spoken aloud. Urban legends, paranormal encounters, nightmares that slipped out of the dream and walked into waking life. This channel is not safe, but it is necessary, because once you have heard what waits in the dark, you will need somewhere to return to. Somewhere that reminds you that you are not alone when the scratching starts behind your walls, when the reflection shifts, when the shadows at the edge of your room hold still just a little too long. So I welcome you. Welcome to the darkest corner of the mind. Welcome to the echoes you were never meant to hear. Welcome to Screams of the Mind, the darkest corner where fears are given. A voice. Subscribe now and turn on the bell icon. You will need a place to come back to when the reflection changes. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. In the spring of 1997, the Coleman family drove toward Blackwood Lane with trunks full of boxes and the bright, fragile idea that a new house could reset everything. The Victorian rose through an overgrown yard, like an old photograph stitched into the world, 3 stories of carved wood and tall windows, clouded with dust, and the porch sagging, as if bowed by long unforgiving seasons. Mary Ann stepped up onto the boards, and already saw curtains, and painted trim, and an attic playroom, where Emily and Jacob could hide away from the world. Thomas measured the front steps with a practical hand, and told himself the bargain price, explained the odd looks from the townfolk. At first the house felt like a promise wrapped in cobwebs. The children ran and discovered rooms that swallowed their laughter and left echoes behind, and Mary Ann hummed as she set plates on shelves that had not known a family in decades. The locals said little beyond small warnings thrown like gossip into the diner air. Bad foundation, drafty place, nothing to do with ghosts. But when the postman paused at the mailbox and quickly looked away, Mary Ann felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The first keys resisted the lock, as if the house did not want to be opened, and inside the air was colder than the porch, though the furnace hummed on, and the wallpaper seemed to fold inward in the corners like faces, watching patiently. Later that night, after boxes were emptied, and the children slept in beds that smelled of cardboard and baby powder, Mary Ann heard what she could almost dismiss as settling wood, but it had rhythm like breathing, and when Emily whispered to Jacob in the dark, "The house does not like us." He laughed, but the sound did not reach Mary Ann. Before the curtains shivered, though there was no breeze, they told each other small explanations for things that could be explained. The draft was old windows, the creak, a tired hinge, the stain upstairs, water damage. Yet explanations frayed quickly, because the house kept adding details that did not belong in ordinary houses. At 1 a.m. Thomas Coleman woke because footsteps crossed the long hallway above his bedroom. But when he climbed the stairs, each door he opened revealed only empty rooms, and dust cast across the floor in the shape of footprints that seemed to start and stop like someone had walked and vanished. At 2 a.m., the dog refused the stairs and crouched at the foot of the landing, whining at nothing visible, and Mary Ann blamed fear and age and poor training until she found the dog staring at the shadow under the attic door, as if someone on the other side breathed against it. At 3:14 a.m. Jacob told his mother his blanket had been pulled away, and he had felt fingers tug, and when Mrs. Coleman checked the bed, she found the covers folded neatly, though the mattress bore a faint impression, as if something heavy had sat and then slipped away. Toys in the spare room were found lined up facing the wall. The pictures on the stairs were turned to look down, like witnesses turned away, and the neighbors who once smiled, now lowered their eyes, and crossed the street rather than past the gate. One evening an old woman grabbed Marianne by the arm on the sidewalk, and hissed, "You should not be there. That house does not forget," and let go, as if fearful of being listened to. And Marianne clutched her groceries, and tried to laugh it away, but the laugh lodged in her throat, like a coin. As days bled into nights, the house stopped pretending to be merely old, and began to orchestrate itself into a living thing. Lights on different floors would blink in the pattern of a slow code, and rooms that had been vacant would smell of someone recently having sat there, the scent of stale tobacco, and something floral and rotten at once. The family tried rituals, practical and desperate. Thomas checked foundations, Marianne scrubbed stains until her hands burned and burned crosses into wood, with a hammer, as if profanity could hold the place at bay. They burned sage and said prayers, and still the house answered with small precise violence. At 12:45 a.m., the children woke to knocking from inside the closet, slow and deliberate, and when Mr. Coleman flung the door open, the toys were turned to stare at the wall like offerings, placed to keep part of the house fed, whispers layered beneath ordinary sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of a settling floor, became voices leaning into ears, saying names not spoken by anyone in the room. And sometimes they called the children by old family names that did not belong to them. Then came the night that split like a cut. At 11:07 p.m. a scream sliced down Blackwood Lane, and then stopped as if someone had closed a book on it. The police found the front door locked from the inside, the hallways wet with condensation though the pipes were whole, and not a trace of the Colemans remained, only overturned furniture, and a thin smell like old candles, and the sense of being observed. The house sits there still, patient and waiting, and if you walk past on a quiet night, you may hear a soft, steady knock 3 times from within, and it sounds like an invitation for someone brave or foolish enough to answer. Chapter 2. The first night in the Coleman home passed quietly, as exhaustion dragged the family into sleep boxes, half-unpacked furniture, pushed against walls, and the weary comfort of finally belonging to a place of their own. But the second night was different. It began with a whisper, soft enough that Marianne almost mistook it for the wind, until Emily, only 8 years old, appeared in the doorway of her parents' room. Her small figure, framed in the dark. "Mommy," she whispered, and Marianne stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. "Emily, what is it, sweetheart?" The child's face was pale, her hands twisting the fabric of her pajama shirt. "The man in the hallway keeps asking me if I am cold for a moment." The words floated in the dark, without meaning. Then Marianne sat up, her heart stumbling. "What man, Emily?" she asked carefully. Emily glanced back into the hallway, her voice thinner. "This time the man in the hallway. He stands by the stairs. He talks funny, like the words get stuck in his throat." Thomas pulled on his robe, muttering. It was only a dream, but he checked the hall anyway, and found no man, no movement, only the air hanging colder than anywhere else in the house. Thomas reached out as if he could feel the temperature difference, and it was sharp, almost like stepping into ice. The thermostat read 68. But here it could not have been warmer than 58. There were no open windows, no draft, no reason at all. When he returned, he forced a smile, and told Emily, it was just a dream. Houses creak, air shifts. She would get used to it. But as she slipped beneath her covers, Emily whispered to herself. It was not a dream, and the house seemed to groan in reply. A week later, Marianne rose early to make breakfast, the house still silent, with the children asleep, and Thomas upstairs showering her bare feet, padding across the kitchen floor, when she passed the basement door, and froze. It stood wide open, swinging slightly on its hinges, a mouth of darkness, yawning downward. Her breath caught, for they had never opened it. They did not even have the key. Thomas had joked the week before. Maybe they did not want to see what was down there yet. Here it was open, and waiting. Marianne's skin prickled. She stepped closer, and then she saw it carved deep into the wood, raw splintering grooves, cut with deliberate force. 3 words. I am here. Her throat tightened. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over herself. When Thomas came down, moments later, she dragged him to see. He stared jaw-locked before forcing a laugh. Vandals, he said. Kids sneaking in before we moved. Thought it would be funny. But Marianne touched the door frame and showed him the raw wood, fresh and sharp. Whoever did this, it was recent. Thomas shook his head, unwilling to let fear take root. He muttered about bad timing, and nothing stolen, but that was what chilled Marianne. Most who would break in, just to leave words and vanish, who or what wanted them to know, it was already in the house. That night they tried to carry on, as though nothing had happened, but Emily whispered at dinner, "Did the man write it?" Thomas set down his fork. "What man? The one in the hallway?" "The cold one," Emily said, her voice tiny. "He told me last night. He was not supposed to be alone anymore." Marianne's hand trembled against her glass, and the house seemed to listen. Days blurred into nights, and the Coleman family noticed more each time. Doors that Thomas locked would stand wide open in the morning. Faint footsteps traveled across the upstairs hall, while all of them sat together. In the living room, objects shifted places, as if unseen hands wanted them rearranged. Emily's doll reappeared again and again, in the locked attic. Jacob woke one night screaming that the tall man leaned over his bed. His eyes too shiny, too close. Marianne rushed in and flicked on the light, but the corner was empty. By the second week, the laughter was gone, their voices quieter, meals shorter, a weight settling over each room. At 12:45 a.m. Marianne swore she heard someone pacing in the hallway, a steady rhythm of feet, dragging just beyond the door. Thomas rose, but when he opened it, nothing stood there, only the colder air pressing against him heavier than before. Emily asked her mother, one morning, if ghosts could write letters, because the man told her he would leave one soon. Marianne tried to hush her words, but she could not stop looking at the basement door, as though expecting it to breathe. The neighbors avoided them, crossing the street without greeting, and one old woman stopped Marianne, gripping her arm, hard enough to leave marks, whispering that the house does not forget. Marianne pulled away, shaken, the fear threading deeper and deeper, and by 11:07 p.m. on a Sunday night the house groaned, so loud the walls seemed to bend. The children screamed from their rooms, and then all sound collapsed into silence, leaving the family frozen with the echo of footsteps climbing stairs that no one could see, and the dread that the real haunting was only beginning. Chapter 3. By the third week, Marianne Coleman could no longer push aside the unease that had been gnawing at her, the cold spots that came and went without reason, the carved words on the basement door, and Emily's chilling conversations with the so-called man in the hallway. All of it pressed against her mind, like a weight she could not shake. So one morning, after dropping the children off at school, she decided to do something she had not done before. She began asking questions. She started at the grocery store, mentioning the house on Blackwood Lane, with a nervous laugh. The cashier's smile tightened. "Oh, that old place. Creepy, huh? Bad foundation, drafty." That was all he offered. The same kind of thin excuses she had heard before, brushed off with half smiles, but eyes that always shifted away. When the house was mentioned, she tried again at the post office, at the coffee shop, even at the library. Polite answers, nothing direct, but one detail stood out each time she spoke the words: Blackwood Lane. Smiles vanished, voices dropped, and conversations ended like shutters slamming closed. It was as though the entire town shared a secret they had sworn never to speak. Finally, one neighbor broke the silence. An elderly woman, wrapped in a shawl, sitting on her porch, her eyes clouded with age, but sharp with memory. Marianne mentioned the house, and the woman's face darkened. She stayed quiet for a long moment, before saying softly, "You should not have moved in there." Marianne's breath caught. "Why not?" she asked.
And the woman's answer chilled her, because that house belonged to Dr. Lawrence Harker. The name meant nothing, but the way she whispered, it made Mary Ann's skin crawl. The old woman leaned closer, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap, her voice low, but firm. He was a respected surgeon once, she said. People trusted him. He had money. Patients came from all over Pennsylvania. He was seen as the man who could fix anyone. But then the whispers began. Families who brought loved ones for simple operations never saw them again. Gallbladder hernia, appendix procedures that should have been routine, gone forever. When families asked questions, they were told the same thing. Complications, tragic outcomes. Medicine sometimes fails. And because he was Dr. Harker, the trusted surgeon, people believed him, at least at first. Mary Ann's stomach nodded. What really happened? She asked. The old woman's eyes grew distant. No one knows. For certain, she murmured, but people said he became obsessed with what he called the silence between life and death. Mary Ann frowned. What does that mean? It means the old woman said that he wanted to hear it. That moment, when a person slips away, when the breath falters and the heart stills, he believed. If he listened closely enough, he could catch something. None of us were meant to hear something beyond medicine. Something beyond life. Mary Ann's hands clenched as the old woman went on. When the police finally searched his home in the 1950s, they found restraints bolted to the basement walls, tools rusted with blood-stains, mattresses so filthy they were never removed, not even after the house was sealed. Mary Ann's mind filled with images, rusty scalpels, leather straps, muffled cries of patients who never left. Her voice trembled. Did they arrest him? The woman shook her head. No, because he vanished before they could reach him. The old woman's eyes flicked toward Blackwood Lane. Some say he fled town, she whispered, but others believe he never left at all. Mary Ann shivered, her voice barely steady. What do you mean? The woman's bony hand gripped hers tighter than expected. That house was his. She said they boarded it up for decades. Nobody touched it. Nobody even went near it. It was supposed to stay forgotten. Her voice cracked. Until your family moved in. Mary Ann could hardly breathe that night. Sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she pictured Dr. Harker, in his white coat, descending the basement stairs. His medical bag in hand. The snap of gloves. The scrape of metal instruments on trays. She could hear muffled cries in the dark. Her stomach twisted, when at last she drifted into uneasy sleep. Her dream dragged her to the basement door. She watched it creak open, and from the shadows, a man's voice whispered, I am here by morning. Mary Ann knew something. Beyond doubt, the house was not just haunted, it was claimed, and the one who claimed it had not left. He had only been waiting. She could feel it in the air. In the silence between heartbeats. In the corners of rooms that were always colder than the rest. Dr. Harker had not gone anywhere. He was still in Blackwood Lane. Listening, waiting, and the Colemans had walked directly into his world. The house belonged to him, and now so did they. Chapter 4. By the start of the fourth week, Daniel Coleman had made up his mind. He could not watch his wife flinch every time the basement door creaked. He could not listen to his daughter whisper about the man in the hallway any longer. And most of all, he could not allow fear to run his home. It was his house, his family, his responsibility. So on a damp Friday evening, as rain lashed against the old windows of the Victorian home, Daniel decided to end the torment once and for all. He would go into the basement himself. The door groaned when he opened it, as though the house itself resisted him. A rush of stale cold air greeted him from the stairwell, colder than any draft had a right to be. He descended slowly, one hand on the railing, the other gripping a heavy flashlight. The wooden steps bent beneath his weight, each creak echoing through the silence. Mrs. Coleman stayed at the top of the stairs, wringing her hands. Daniel, maybe we should just leave it, please. Her voice wavered. He looked up at her, his face pale, but set. If we don't face this now, Mary Ann, It will never stop. Her lips parted, as though to argue. But the fear in her eyes silenced her. She stepped back, leaving him to the dark. At first the basement seemed ordinary, concrete floor, old shelves lined with forgotten tools, boxes stacked against the walls. But the deeper his flashlight swept across the room, the more wrong it became. The walls were not made of stone or brick as he had always believed. They were lined with thick faded panels, soundproofing panels, the kind used in recording studios or psychiatric wards, and etched into them were furious, frantic claw marks. Some shallow, some so deep they tore through the material itself, exposing the studs beneath. Daniel's throat tightened. His breath quickened. The air smelled wrong, a sour blend of rust and damp rot, but beneath it all was something faint, metallic, coppery, familiar. Blood. At the far end of the basement, behind a wall of old shelving, Daniel's flashlight caught something unnatural. The wall did not quite line up with the rest of the foundation. It was a false wall. His heart hammered as he dragged the shelves aside. The sound echoed heavy and jarring, as though the basement itself disapproved of his intrusion. Behind the wall a narrow gap revealed itself, and within that gap was a hidden room. Daniel stepped inside cautiously. The beam of his flashlight revealed a sight that froze his blood in his veins. A surgical chair, still bolted firmly to the ground, its leather cracked and peeling, but unmistakably stained with long dried dark blotches. Rusting metal restraints hung loose at the armrests, and footrests swaying slightly in the stale air, as though waiting for someone to fill them again. Trays of surgical tools sat on a rusted cart in the corner. Scalpels, forceps, bones, saws, all corroded their edges, eaten away by decades of damp air. And above the chair, carved into the plaster of the wall so deep the material crumbled around it, were 3 words: "Let me out." Daniel staggered backward, bile rising in his throat. His flashlight beam trembled in his hands. For the first time he felt something in that house staring back at him. Not just a memory, not just fear, but something alive. That night, the Colemans barely slept. Every sound of the house became unbearable. The groan of the pipes, the whistle of wind through old cracks, the tick of the clock in the hallway, but none of it compared to what they swore they heard coming from beneath them. Footsteps pacing the basement floor, chains dragging across the concrete, clinking softly as though restraints were being lifted and tested. And then at exactly 3:12 a.m., every clock in the house stopped. The living room clock, the digital alarm upstairs, even Daniel's wristwatch. Each one froze. The house fell into an unnatural silence, the kind that presses against your ears until it feels deafening. Then came the sound. Not quick, not hurried, but steady, as though something that had been waiting for decades was finally free to walk again. Marianne clutched Daniel's arm, whispering, "Tell me you hear that. Please tell me you hear that." And Daniel, pale as death, whispered back, "I do." They waited, frozen, listening. And from the basement below a voice rose, faint, raspy, inhuman. It whispered 3 words. Words that should never have been carved into that wall. "Let me out." The Colemans realized something horrifying. That night, the basement was not just a part of the house, it was the heart of it. And now something inside was awake. The air in the rooms grew heavy, as though each breath stole a little more of their strength. The sound of pacing below turned to a dragging shuffle, closer to the base of the stairs. They could swear they saw shadows stretching across the floorboards, reaching toward them, as if eager to crawl into their room. At 3:14, the lights flickered, and a sudden slam shook the basement door shut on its own. The walls quivered, the locks rattled, and the whisper rose again, louder. This time, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." Daniel gripped his wife's hand, his eyes filled with terror. They both understood something unspoken. The house was no longer theirs. It had chosen to wake up, and it wanted more than silence. It wanted them, and with every passing second, it was deciding whether to let them go or keep them forever. Chapter 5. A month passed. 30 nights of footsteps, 30 nights of whispers in the dark, 30 nights of watching shadows move where no shadows should be. The Colemans were unraveling. Daniel had grown gaunt, his once steady hands trembling at the smallest sound, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. Mrs. Coleman barely rested. She clutched Emily in bed, as if holding her tightly would keep the house at bay. Her body jumped at every gust of wind, every tick of the clock, every sigh of the old walls, and Emily, the once playful child, no longer played. She sat quietly in corners, staring at the peeling wallpaper, humming songs no one had taught her. The house was winning, and then came the final night. It began just after midnight. The storm outside rattled the glass, but inside the family huddled in the living room. The television was no comfort, only a screen of static, every channel reduced to snow. Mrs. Coleman whispered, "Daniel, it is worse tonight," and she was right. The house was different that night. It was not creaking like before, it was breathing. The walls pulsed faintly, as though something unseen inhaled and exhaled behind them. The wallpaper seemed to ripple like skin stretched too thin. And then came the chains, not faint, not distant, but loud, heavy, dragging across the basement floor, echoing up the stairs. Emily lifted her head, her voice soft but chillingly calm. "He is coming upstairs now." The family froze. Each footstep thudded against the wood, deliberate, steady, closer and closer. The basement door rattled against its hinges. Daniel shoved a chair against the knob, his shaking hands fumbling. Mrs. Coleman cried out, "Daniel, it will not hold it. Never holds." The door stopped rattling, and silence fell. Then came 3 knocks, slow, heavy from the other side, followed by a voice deep, hollow, suffocating. "Are you cold?" Emily whimpered and buried her face against her mother's chest. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He shouted, "Leave us alone. What do you want from us?" The answer came, drawn out, whispering through the cracks in the door. "I want to come out." The chair groaned under the weight, pressing against the wood. The frame splintered. Daniel grabbed his wife and daughter, pulling them toward the front door. His hand touched the knob, but before he could twist it, every light in the house flickered violently, then died. Darkness swallowed them whole. The storm outside howled, but inside, the blackness pressed heavy against their skin. Whispers slithered through the rooms, circling them, overlapping, dozens of voices, murmuring at once. Mrs. Coleman screamed, "They are all around us." The chains came again, but no longer from the basement. They rattled through the hallways, clattered across the ceiling, dragged across the staircase. The sound was everywhere. The house had become a cage. Daniel yanked the front door open. The storm wailed, wind and rain crashing inside. He shoved his wife and daughter through, yelling, "Go, do not look back." But as he stepped onto the porch, the air grew freezing cold. His breath fogged pale in the night, and from the window beside the door, something looked out. A figure, tall, gaunt. Its eyes were pits of endless black, and it smiled. The family ran. They did not gather their things. They did not lock the door. They did not even shut it. They ran barefoot into the rain, stumbling through mud down Blackwood Lane. The house loomed behind them, its windows glowing faintly, like watching eyes. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs trembled, until the house was only a shadow behind them. They never returned. The house still stands, empty, abandoned, its porch sagging, its windows dark. But the locals know better. They cross the street, rather than walk too close. They quicken their pace when the wind dies, and the night grows too still. Because sometimes, if you stand too near, you will hear it. The faint echo of chains, dragging across the warped floorboards, a voice drifting through the cracks, soft, almost polite. "Are you cold?" And if you dare look through the basement window, you might see him. The figure, tall, gaunt, his head tilted just slightly as though listening, his endless black eyes fixed on the darkness. His smile stretched thin and cruel, and he paces, waiting. Some say the Colemans escaped, but left a part of themselves behind. Some whisper that Emily still hums those strange songs at night, her dreams filled with the voice. Others believe the house is patient, that it does not need to chase anyone, because sooner or later, someone will always be curious enough to step inside. The wood still groans, the wallpaper still ripples, the air still breathes, and at night, if you listen close, you can hear the sound of clocks stopping all at once. The second hands freeze, the silence thickens, and then at 3:14 a.m. the pacing begins again. Whoever stands closest will feel the cold seep into their bones. Whoever lingers too long will hear the whisper rising. Are you cold? Whoever dares to answer may find the chains wrapping around their feet, dragging them down into the dark, because the house on Blackwood Lane does not forget, and it never lets go. So tonight I leave you with a question lingering in the air, heavy as dust. Do you believe the Colemans were merely victims of an old house, its rotting beams, its cracked plaster, its sighing foundation? Or do you believe something darker walked those halls, something colder waiting for them? In the silence, because there are stories whispered in Blackwood Lane, stories about Dr. Lawrence Harker, the physician who lived there, long before the Colemans bought the property. A man whose patients never seemed to leave, whose basement smelled of iron, and whose neighbors claimed they could hear sobbing through the cellar windows, long after his clinic was supposed to be closed for the night. Some say he vanished, others say he was buried beneath his own floorboards. But the Colemans, when they stepped into that house, they did not just step into dust and wood, they stepped into memory, and memory does not forget. So when Mr. Coleman reported the strange drafts, when Mrs. Coleman swore she heard footsteps at 2 a.m., when the children whispered about someone humming lullabies, that none of them knew it was easy to dismiss it as stress or imagination. Easy until the night, the youngest swore she saw a man standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, his face hidden in the dark, only his hand visible gripping the railing, like he had been waiting there, all along, waiting for someone to notice him. And so the question remains, did the Colemans awaken something that had been sleeping, or had it never slept at all? Mrs. Coleman wrote in her journal about the smell of antiseptic in the hallways, as if someone had just cleaned surgical instruments. She described waking at 3:14 a.m. to hear breathing beside her ear, though Mr. Coleman was asleep on the other side of the bed, and when she turned, she swore she felt a hand brush against her cheek, but no one was there. The walls whispered too late at night, too clear to be imagination. Her children began to refuse to sleep upstairs, saying the shadows pressed down on them, that the corners of their rooms moved, like they were alive. One night, Mr. Coleman gathered his courage, and went into the basement, flashlight in hand. He said, the beam flickered over rusted hooks, bolted into the ceiling, over stains that had never truly washed out of the stone floor. He said he heard shuffling footsteps, but the basement was empty, until he turned to leave, and heard a voice, soft, calm, clinical, say, sit down. We are not finished with you. Mr. Coleman dropped the flashlight. He bolted upstairs, and locked the door. But locks mean nothing to a house that remembers nothing to a doctor that never left. And from that night forward, the family understood the truth. They were not alone. So ask yourself, was it the house itself, feeding on their fear, absorbing every scream, every sleepless night, until it became strong enough to answer back? Or was it Dr. Lawrence Harker, pacing the halls, whispering through the vents, moving from room to room, searching for his next patient, desperate to finish work, interrupted by death? Perhaps you think the Colemans fled because of creaking wood and faulty wiring, but I want you to picture this: Mrs. Coleman holding her children close, as she hears footsteps climbing the stairs, at 12:45 a.m., the rhythm steady like a doctor, approaching a bedside picture, Mr. Coleman pressing his ear to the door, as a voice murmurs on the other side, charts rustling, tools clinking as if an unseen hand were preparing for surgery. Picture the silence that follows, when the footsteps stop right outside the bedroom door. Do you open it? Do you wait? Do you pray that the house is satisfied with the fear it has already taken? The Colemans never returned to that house, and today it sits on Blackwood Lane, its windows blind, its doors swollen, its basement sealed. But some say, if you walk by at night, if you linger too long, you will hear it, a soft knock from inside. Just one knock, deliberate, waiting for someone curious enough to answer, waiting for you.
Thank you for watching. If you have not already, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next nightmare. So tonight, I leave you with this. The story may have ended, but the echoes remain. Do you believe it was only fear? Or do you believe something darker still lingers, waiting in the silence? Tell me in the comments below, because every thought, every theory, every shadow you share becomes part of the story. And yes, I read them all. If this tale followed you into the dark, then be ready. Because tomorrow, when the sun sets again, we will step even deeper into the shadows. And trust me, you will want to hear what is waiting there. Until then, remember this. When the floorboards creak, when the reflection shifts, when the night grows too still, it may not be the house settling. Sometimes, it is the house watching you back. Welcome to Screams of the Mind, the darkest corner where fears are given a voice.